The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
Antidote.
The Antidote.
Y estás escuchando The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
The Antidote.
You're listening to The Antidote with Dave Hawkins.
With Christian music that doesn't suck.
This is the sound of my certain self being unwound. I sink deeper and deeper into hell, a whole shell, entering a new realm inside my mind, captive to a new right. So this is what it sounds like. This is what it sounds like. It's all around. So this is what it sounds like. Millions of breathing, trapped in my own cell, living in my own hell. What is worth discerning through all this hurting? This is truly concerning. I've seen hell and hope work together. Am I a man or a monster? Am I a man or a monster? I can feel it now. No returning back to all this hurting. The deep and dark has swallowed me up. There's no describing what I have become. Must I destroy myself to see the good breathing? I was certain of who I was, but now I'm certain that it's a loss. Seems so much harder now to keep my feet on the ground. Keep my feet on the ground. I don't belong here, trapped in this nightmare. Pick me up, pull me out from this place that has been bound. I don't belong here, trapped in this nightmare. This is my life unwound, and this is how it sounds. 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 Will I ever exist again? With my own heart within my own skin. Can you feel it now?
No one likes nightmares, but I am enjoying the song Nightmare off the new full-length The Will to Rebuild from tonight's guest, For All Eternity. Based out of Sydney, Australia, the band brings beauty and brutality into their melodic metalcore. Their music is awesome, but it may be the message in For All Eternity's lyrics that make the biggest impact. There's a 16-hour time difference between Peterborough, Ontario and Sydney, but For All Eternity's Shane Carroll and I were able to sort out some time for a talk about the band's past, how Shane's personal struggles built the theme for their just-released album, The Will to Rebuild, and about how this release is radically different from their previous music. Enjoy our talk. Shane Carroll of Sydney's For All Eternity meets with The Antidote. Thanks for coming, Shane.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Tell everyone how warm it is in Sydney today.
At the moment, it is 40 degrees Celsius, so quite hot, quite hot.
And when you drop the zero off of that, that is our temperature, 4 degrees here today.
Isn't that just unreal?
For All Eternity has some pretty deep roots in the city of Sydney. When did the band start up?
Yeah, so we've been a band since, 2008. We sort of formed and we're just jamming out, and that's quite a while ago. We started playing shows very sparsely in 2009, and sort of started touring in 2010. We didn't actually get our debut record out until 2012. But through the course of the band and in the early days and beginning, I guess our participation in the local scene here in Sydney was critical to our growth as a band. So always had a really great time playing in Sydney, and we've always had a really great following here. So yeah, no, it's been some time, but yeah, we've seen some pretty good opportunities here in Sydney.
Australia has quite a significant metal scene.
Yeah, we do.
And I've always wondered this, with For All Eternity having Christian themes, has it been easy for you to fit in there?
It's interesting that. In some ways we definitely have benefited from being a little different in that sense and having a different set of beliefs to majority of the metal acts in Australia. Just like anything, there are positives and there are negatives when you're talking about, a religious affiliation and a set of beliefs. So I couldn't tell you that it's been all positive, but I couldn't tell you that it's been all negative either.
Well, I know something that's true about Canadian bands is that they have a rough time touring Canada because there's these huge distances between shows. You guys have done a lot of touring over the years. Is it the same situation for Aussie bands?
Absolutely. So it's only pretty much works out to be 5 capital cities here in Australia that we tour to frequently. We're talking, there's from Brisbane to Sydney. So Brisbane's in Queensland, Sydney's in New South Wales. That is a 11-hour drive. And then you go on from Sydney to Melbourne. It's a 9-hour drive. And then you go on from Melbourne to Adelaide, which is an 8-hour drive. And then on the west coast, there's Perth. It's too expensive to drive there. From Adelaide, it would take you, I think it's something like 39 to 40 hours to drive there.
Oh, man.
Across a desert, which we don't actually ever do. We've flown over there a few times just because it's more financially viable than to put the wear and tear on the vehicle. And but yeah, very limited places to tour here in Australia. But, we've over the years, we've been involved in some really great tours, and we've even toured to some more regional places, sort of off the beaten track. So yeah, we've made do with a pretty great assortment of city and country shows here in Australia.
Well, with For All Eternity being in Australia, the chances of me ever seeing one of your live shows is just about zero. I'm going to get you to make it up to me. Describe your show.
Describe our show. I would say it's a very intense show. I think that myself and the guys absolutely throw ourselves at the performance to the point where after the show we're all just sort of gasping for air, not really leaving anything left behind. It is quite energetic. It is quite big and cinematic. We're a very passionate band, so when we do play our songs, we give it everything we have. But don't count your chances so slim, because we are very fortunate to be in talks with a few different people over in North America about touring there, hopefully sometime in 2018. So not all hope is lost in that regard.
Okay, I'll keep my fingers crossed about that one.
That's it.
And since your shows are so exhausting, we'll make sure that they have some paramedics there with stretchers to carry you off stage.
Absolutely. That would be lovely. I tend to go bright red after our shows. I absolutely smash myself, and then after the show I sit in one spot and I try and not move for at least 30 minutes until I bring myself back down to earth and sort of get some composure about myself. But it's absolutely worth it, mate.
Cry
solid ground coming from the 2012 days of For All Eternity and their first full-length. Everyone always describes music as being universal, but with your band being located in Australia, it's got to make it difficult for All Eternity to get your music noticed.
Absolutely, and I think there is definitely an understanding from heavy bands in Australia that things need to be done a little differently. You know, we've seen a lot of great artists come out of Australia over the past few years that I guess are, in their own right, reinventing heavy music. You know, really great bands like Northlane and In Heart's Wake and Thy Art Is Murder. And, you know, there's a lot of really big bands coming out of Australia that are industry frontrunners these days just because of the nature of being in a place so far, far away. You can't get by just being another band. You have to do something outrageous. You have to do something completely unique with your music and with your craft for people to really take notice. And, you know, in some sense of the word, being Australian has been a bit of a thing for a while. Oh, this band's from Australia, they must be awesome, sort of thing. But it's probably died off a little bit, that sort of fandom around, oh, I'm going to listen to these guys because they're from down under, you know? Mm-hmm. But no, I think there's definitely a broad awareness with heavy music artists here in Australia to be reinventing the craft a little bit and thinking outside the box to gain that notice. Just for the fact that we can't just hop in a van and tour the States 6 months out of the year, you know what I mean? Before we even plant our feet on American soil, you know, we have to spend thousands of dollars in flights and gear hire and all the different stuff that would come so simply to a band that is an American band or is somewhere neighbouring close by. So, yeah, no, I definitely think that there's something to Australian bands in terms of working out a different sort of avenue to get that coverage because, I mean, the industry is so massive and there's so many bands out there and there's so much noise on social media. You're really fighting for people's attention.
And I guess the one other major problem you get is doing interviews with outfits that are based in North America, like the Antidote.
Oh no, that's no problem at all. No, I have done a few interviews on this promo cycle where I've had to be up at about, I think it was about 3 a.m., which was not heaps great, but you know, it's no problem at all to speak with lovely people like yourself, mate. It's no trouble for me at all.
Oh, lovely people, yeah. You don't really know me, do you?
Not yet.
Well, before the band signed to Facedown Records, you did the independent thing. What was For All Eternity like as a band musically during those early days?
Well, I mean, Facedown didn't come into the picture until 2015, so we're talking, 5-6 years of For All Eternity before we partnered up with Facedown. I would say that it was a much more immature version of ourselves. The record that we released on Facedown in 2015 was written prior to Facedown even being on the map for us as a band. I guess we were on our ways to becoming a more mature band, a more professional band. But I mean, if we're talking 2010, 2011, 2012, we were just kids, we're in our early 20s, just touring around with our mates. And, we got some really great supports and, playing under some really influential bands that we've loved listening to growing up. And, we've had some really great opportunities. I feel like when we're a bit younger and, taking some of those opportunities, maybe took some of them a bit for granted, I guess. And I feel a bit more appreciative now than what I think I was at the time. Fortunately, we've played with some amazing bands. I'm sure you're aware of the band Skillet.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we actually played with them in Sydney in 2011, and it was super sold out. They turned away 500 people at the door. And to have members of Skillet come up to our band after we played and say, yo, you guys are so awesome. We love your band. We love your music. Like, a few of the members were saying that they predominantly listen to heavy music, even though they're more of a rock sort of act. I was absolutely fanboying that a bit. But now I look back and I think, Skillet are just like crazy big. And for them to have said that about a bunch of kids just not really knowing what they're doing at the time, was a really nice gesture for them. Definitely now in hindsight, I look back and I think, man, we've done some amazing, amazing things. And I mean, we're fortunate and hopeful all at the same time to do some more amazing things with the band moving forward.
Shane may be a Skillet fan, but I'm not. I am a fan of Break of Dawn from All Eternity's Metanoia release.
Assuring me that there is no way out. All I have is mission, my incapability. No way out from me if I live free of a remedy. How is this so hard to shake, but so willing to change? What can I make of this life if I'm unable to break through? My outcry for life is swallowed by the night sky. My outcry for life is swallowed by the night sky. The sunrise I seek is moments from my eyes, gazing upon the skies, longing for the departure of night. I'm being dragged away into endless night without putting up a fight. I owe it to myself to fight the oppression, enduring till morning to stop it from starting. Will I wallow in my self-defeat and paralyzing the sight? Will I ever find peace of mind, or my demons to come and destroy my life? Facing my last hour, a fear of dying here, dying with no will and most despair. Will I live to see the light? Will I see the sunrise? I'm being hopeful for the sunrise I seek is moments from my eyes, gazing upon the skies, longing for the departure of night. Looking towards the skyline, forever awaiting the sun to rise, waiting for the break of dawn.
It must be surreal for you playing with bands that you've enjoyed listening to.
Absolutely. I mean, even if we speak of Face Down Records, I was such a fan of the label and the bands they were putting out. I remember in 2008 when me and our guitarists were on our way to Bandprac. I remember I had purchased a merch bundle that had a Face Down Records CD sampler in it, and I hadn't heard of them at the time. And I popped it in the CD player, and I heard, amazing, amazing artists like Impending Doom and For Today and A Plea for Purging, and I'm just like, these bands are incredible. And I just fell in love with the label, fell in love with the artists. And who would have known that years down the track we would have signed to the same label and put out music alongside the same bands and play shows alongside the same bands. So it's really a bit of a bucket list thing, if I think about it, for me to be in this band that is now, signed to Face Down Records I mean, they've never signed any other band from Australia, so we've got that sort of special thing that we're, involved in this label that is always predominantly, signing homegrown artists over there in the States. These days you just got to count your blessings because, we've got plenty to be thankful for.
A little bit earlier, you'd mentioned about your label debut on Face Down, Metanoia.
Yeah,
that
that's
did
right.
great on the charts and got rave reviews.
It certainly did.
It was described as being breathtaking and dynamic. I'm not going to disagree. I love the album. But it also brought in more of the melodic metalcore style.
It did.
You also tagged a major guest on Harness, brought in Maddie Montgomery for Today.
That's correct.
Were you able to actually have Maddie in the studio with you, or was it one of those remote things?
It was remote. We toured with For Today in 2011 in Australia, and we formed a bit of a friendship with those guys. So interestingly, Maddie, when he did the guest spot on our new record, he couldn't be with us in the studio at the time, but he came into the studio when he was on tour with For Today. He was passing through the town that we recorded the record in. We actually recorded our Metanoia album with Brian Hood in Nashville, Tennessee in 2013. And I think some while after that, Maddie was passing through town, and me and Maddie were in touch. At the time, we were quite heavily in touch, and we spoke a lot. And they were really great guys and really uplifting of us and really supportive of our band. So, he was more than happy to jump on the record, and he just popped in the studio. Actually, when we recorded our first record, Beyond the Gates, in 2012, Maddie and his family did pop into the studio in Nashville when we were there, and we hung out. And we asked Maddie to be part of the record. We're a big fan of his band For Today, and I think he's an absolutely amazing vocalist. We were very fortunate to get him on the record, and I think the end result sounds great. But like you were saying about Metanoia a little earlier, definitely super melodic metal album. I guess comparatively to our new record, it's probably a bit more comfortable, but not without its purpose, not without its time served, and helping our band forge our sound and move forward. We were talking about the Metanoia being our debut on Face Down Records. Something really amazing to go hand in hand with what you were saying about how well it charted and how well it was received is actually that it was the second highest selling debut album in Face Down Records' entire history, which is amazing.
Wow.
For a couple of guys from down under to achieve. So we're pretty happy with that. It's pretty surreal. Hey, this is Shane from For All Eternity, and you've got The Antidote with Dave Hawkins.
How can you lie through your teeth and force your ways on all you make? I will resist you and take my stand against your schemes. I fought and lost a battle against you before.
That was Maddie Montgomery's voice on Unharnessed. Too bad that Maddie and For Today are out of the music scene. Good news is that For All Eternity are going strong with their new release, The Will to Rebuild. Shane explains how the songs and album is structured on the next part of our chat. So we both agree that Metanoia is great, but really, I think you've topped that on The Will to Rebuild.
Oh, fantastic. I appreciate that, mate.
It's great, and it's different from the previous releases. You've given it a theme also.
Yes, absolutely. No, it is a very apparent departure from the For All Eternity sound that, people are familiar with. And, some people that are really affectionate towards the music our band's done in the past, some people, even though they love the new record, they're a little taken back that our style has changed and what they expected this new release to be wasn't that. But we're finding that most commonly people are pleasantly surprised, which is great.
They're all upset because they've seen that you've come out of the closet and admitted that you're actually an emo band?
Pretty much. This is an emo metal record, 100%. It's very emotive. It's super emotional, absolutely. No question about the content being really heartfelt and really raw, and really honest. So, I mean, I'm pretty happy. I think people are finding it to be very refreshing in a genre that's otherwise predictable.
It's predictable, and also it's not as revealing. And that's the difference with this release, because it doesn't fit that typical metal persona.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think in metal, bands just want to be tough and really, strong and powerful. But I feel like it's severely understated, the kind of power that can be derived from honest emotion. Just being really, really raw and personal with the content. I mean, in the past, the content we've put out has always been hypotheticals and, a point of view or an intention of stirring hope in people, which is a great thing. I feel like in the past, having that sort of perspective and that outlook and that viewpoint from the band in the tracks has definitely been able to serve its purpose in helping people to overcome their own struggles. And, you want to stir hope. You want to help people with music. And I guess this record is decidedly less hopeful in the, as strange as it may sound, but, I mean, the content is very personal to me. I went through some pretty serious life transitions last year that saw me in the most difficult place I've ever found myself in my entire life. So, talking about that honestly and openly on the record, as difficult as it was, also it was completely liberating.
I do get the intention of the album name, The Will to Rebuild, because obviously people fall into rough times in their lives, as you mentioned yourself, but then they sit there with their problems. You really get into that specifically on the album's single, Derailed.
Absolutely. So Derailed, I mean, with the album we had very specifically intended for tracks to have a visual setting. And the track Derailed is lyrically, visually, musically is technically a runaway freight train. And I mean, the freight train itself is symbolic of life and how, we're living this life that, it's always moving and it's ever changing and it's always going forward. But in the most crazy circumstances, our life can just be completely derailed. Our life can be turned on its head and taken from us even. This life we lead is a volatile one and a difficult one. But we've got to embrace the things we love. We've got to embrace the things that we care about rather than trying to just get by in life. We need to live life. And there's not enough emphasis on that in the world, I don't think. And, we're all part of this machine that is, society. And I just think that if you're getting up in the morning, you're going to work and you're, doing these things that you're almost told to do to be a valuable member of society, yet there's no vilification of that. There's nothing that in turn you're turning around and passionately doing with your life, then what's it worth, really? And these hardships we go through as well, you know, I've learned in my own life, especially over the last couple of years, that the pain you experience shouldn't stop you from living your life. The pain is part of life, and if you're letting it stop you from getting up in the morning, just like it did for myself, if you're letting it stop you from getting up in the morning and walking out the door and leading your life, then there's something wrong and something needs to change.
Could you hold regret as your time slips past? If it doesn't hurt, then what's it worth? That's why I remain within the pain. Nothing is lost and no one is to blame. That's why I remain within the pain. Afraid to fail, be afraid to slip away.
I mentioned earlier about the band bringing in more of that melodic influence on Metanoia. I think For All Eternity really has perfected that on the Will to Rebuild. On the new album, you've given the music more room to breathe.
Yeah, interesting you say that, because we've always been a very guitar-driven band, so, you know, the melodic elements you've seen from us in the past is almost entirely centralized around our guitars. I mean, in some elements, absolutely the singing vocals from our drummer Michael. But but almost always the guitars. So, I mean, even in terms of the writing process, we would have written the guitars and it would have just been like, okay, here's the guitar riff, write everything else around that. Whereas this time, as you said, the guitars have more room to breathe. Everything is decidedly spaced out and has its own purpose and its own fixture within the musical soundscape that we've created. So there's a very large cinematic element to the record that is almost akin to, you know, what we would describe as a movie soundtrack. You know, really large instrumentation and sounds that are almost orchestral in some sense, that we had accounted for before we even started writing guitars, and how emotive the vocals are and how emotive the delivery of the vocals are and the content of the lyrics was all decided prior to a song foundation being laid. So instead of our guitarist Nick writing a riff and then saying, hey, Shane, do this, I would flip that around and say, I want to sing about this. I want this track to sound like a freight train powering through. And then Nick would write the track based off that vision. You know, every track on the album actually has a visual setting. So every track on the album is written to sound like it's set in a certain place. And we have another track, we have Fallout. The visual setting is in a burning house. And I mean, it's amazing what you can do when you, I guess, start writing music with the intention of having it sound like a physical something. So definitely a completely different stylistic approach to writing this material this time around.
The song Shane spoke about, Fallout, showcases the new style of For All Eternity.
For the first time
Something that makes the music of For All Eternity really quite dramatic is how you do the vocals. I mean, they're split virtually equally between screams and clean. Do you enjoy that kind of balance?
I do, yes. So our band and our brand of music has always been the contrast between myself and Michael vocally. I write all the vocal parts, including all the singing and all the melodies. So when I guess I'm writing a song structure for vocals, I'm very mindful of both entities and always making sure they get an even playing field and even runtime. I mean, evidently this record, The Will to Rebuild, is probably more in the realm of screaming, but that's before you take into account that my screaming has evolved from just a monotonous mid sort of scream to actually being a more living, breathing adaptation of screaming, where I'm actually screaming some singing melodies within the screams, and being a lot more raw. And I mean, I've completely overhauled my vocal style. Instead of just screaming a bit of a style, I'm doing more yelling and more of my own voice in the delivery as well. So, I mean, in terms of this record versus the last, you're seeing a lot more experimentation from myself and Michael vocally in every write, really. You're hearing me sing, you're hearing Michael scream. We're blurring the line between where I stop and where he starts, whereas before it was the stark contrast that we were so desiring, the really low screams with the really high singing. But now I scream, and then off the back of that, Michael screams, and then I sing, and Michael sings, and it's not so clear defined anymore. And people have even had to ask me, is this you singing, or is this Michael singing, or is this you screaming, or Michael screaming? Which I think is fantastic. I think myself and Michael have an amazing bond vocally. I think we both bring completely unique elements to the table, and I think together it just works.
It's so interesting that you've done that, because vocalists virtually never change their style.
Yeah, this is right. I mean, I guess to pair with the really emotive change in the music, we decided that, the vocals had to change as well. I guess I've been noticing in heavy music, I mean, I'm an avid fan. I listen to heavy music all the time. If I'm listening to anything at all, it's something heavy. On occasion, I will jam out to something a little slower, a little bit more, I guess, relaxing, I should say. But no, I've definitely noticed in heavy music lately that there's been a bit of a lack of creativity in that realm of screaming and heavy vocalization. So this is, I guess, my spin on a refresh in the genre. This is my contribution to wanting to take a step forward and wanting to realize a potential to move forward. And this is my take on what could be the new way of things, to just be very raw, very emotional, and to notate screams as well, to have melodies within the screams rather than just your monotonous rah, rah, rah stuff.
What it's worth, you all deserve. Love's so scattered.
I love the line from the song Ascendant. I know I'm stronger than I've ever been. It has to be tough to climb up out of the pit you may have fallen into, but it can be done just like Shane was able to do. This is the final episode of the year for The Antidote. With this show having the tagline, Christian music that doesn't suck, it's obvious that The Antidote has opinions about music. Join in as I bring what I feel are the very best releases of 2017 on our next episode, and be prepared for a few surprises. It's sort of funny to have such a bleak album being released just before Christmas. But it's not completely dark. There are moments when For All Eternity shines a light on the end of the tunnel. Shane and I get into that on the final part of our talk and the song Clearer. See you again next week. For All Eternity gave the album a resolution on the final song, Clearer. It has the line, I'm waiting for the hands that mend to make me whole again. Do you want to embellish on that?
Well, I mean, I myself right now am far and away better mentally and emotionally than when I wrote the record. But at the time, speaking to our guitarist about what we wanted to convey with the record, and it is, as I've mentioned, it is quite a hopeless record in all of its lyrical content, for the fact that at the time I was completely hopeless in myself, in my head, in my heart. And that lyric, I'm waiting for the hands that mend to make me whole again, is basically a cry for help for anyone or anything to make the pain go away.
And what was it that changed you, that brought you out of these struggles?
If I'm very honest, I think it was a few things. I think writing this record and getting my emotion out onto paper, onto these tracks, 1,000% helped me on my way down the path to recover from that, really difficult place. But I think it was just time for me. I think it was just time to really see value in continuing my life. When you think your whole world is just walked away from you, so it's like, well, what's the point in living anymore? But I think just time played its role, in a track on the album called The Vacated. I actually gave that notion a bit of a nod, and in one of the lyrics is, this pain is shaping who I am, though time is taking me away from this. So I just think it was a time thing. I mean, since I've gone through all the crappy stuff, it's been maybe 14 months now, so it's still pretty fresh, absolutely. But in my mind, I'm more optimistic than ever. For life, I'm more optimistic with what my future holds, and, I'm waiting for the hands that mend to make me whole again. Maybe I am still in a place where I'm waiting for that moment to come, but it's not to say that I'm without hope right now.
Well, Shane, thanks for being so honest about this, and best of luck with The Will to Rebuild, and thanks for taking time for The Antidote.
No, it was fantastic. I do appreciate it, mate. Thank you.